Hello, puppies and kittens. We have on John, who on Facebook was going by the name of the God Conclusion. We had a bit of a chat on Facebook wherein he said that some things about what he said macroevolution that I wanted to contest. And also he said that the reason he rejects what he called macroevolution is because he imagines that the universe must be planned and that there is evidence of a planner. So, John, take it away. Make your case, please.
Well, thank you for having me on the show, first of all. And before we get started, I'd like to start on a high note and congratulate you on your degree in anthropology from Arizona State.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I'll go ahead and say, based on watching your internet video work, a master's degree might not be out of the question for you. You're very talented video guy.
Thank you very much.
So I actually, the God Conclusion is not just a moniker that I chose to use on the internet. It's the name of a book I wrote that was in direct opposition to, as you probably can guess, Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion. And I don't know how much, I mean, I could talk for 30 minutes before we get into it, but at the heart of my argument is, first of all, the belief that, or it's even an axiom of my argument, is life cannot evolve until it exists.
So you accept that once life exists, then it can evolve?
Potentially.
Potentially. You've often contested.
I have reasons for and objections that we can go into in detail on why I think macroevolution is not true.
Okay, well, first of all, what is macroevolution?
Macroevolution is the descent with modification, the origin of a new species or creature descending from an existing species.
So you're saying that when Ken Ham and Kent Hovind and other evangelical leaders...
If you don't mind, if we could not get into Ken Ham and Ken Hovind and those guys, I'd like to just stick with my argument and your argument.
Would that be fine? But you're saying that when they admit that speciation has happened and is observed, they're mistaken?
In my opinion, yes.
Okay, so you understand that even young Earth creationists, even the people who argue against macroevolution, admit that macroevolution happens and that speciation is observed and has been documented.
Okay.
Okay, you're saying that it's not possible, but
I
it's
don't
already
believe
been
it happened, and I can explain in detail why I don't believe it happened.
Okay, what you don't believe it has happened and has been documented.
Correct.
Okay, explain to me how what has happened has not happened.
I'm not sure I follow that question.
Okay. We in agriculture, for example, we've been using evolutionary principles throughout the entire history of agricultural and animal husbandry. We've actually seen speciation happen both in the field and in the lab. New species emerge from existing species. It's a thing that happens a lot, and we can document that throughout phylogenies, throughout not just a fossil record, but in real time and in existing animals. When we do genetic phylogenies, for example, we see not only confirmation that we have derived domestic dog breeds from Asiatic wolves, but that there are also other species of dogs that were never wolves. And we can confirm that, yeah, they're dogs, but they're different species of dogs. And the same goes for cattle and for cats and for corn and for a host of different crops. Corn, for example. We created that species out of a species of Mexican grass called teosinte. There was like 5 major mutations involved in that transition, and then many more to cultivate the many different varieties of maize and corn that came out of that. But essentially, there's only 5 genes difference between long years of corn and this Mexican grass, even though they look very different.
Okay.
So you're saying that what we know to be true didn't happen. And
I'm
you're going to
saying
explain how
that
we.
if you look at these charts that are online that are famous, the ape to human progression chart that shows a chimpanzee or a bonobo or some other old world ape, but definitely and distinctly ape animal. And then at the other end of the spectrum is a human being. I'm saying I do not believe that happened. And I
Okay, so
can
you don't
show
understand that
why.
we are apes.
Sorry.
You don't understand that we are apes.
Apes have 48 chromosomes and humans
Mhm.
have 46.
An ape, by definition, is any member of the taxonomic superfamily Hominoidea, and that includes the great apes and the lesser apes. We are in the category of great apes, along with gorillas, chimpanzees, and there's multiple species of each, and different species of orangutans, and then about 50 more species in the fossil record.
Okay.
The category, the classification, or the characters that identify what great apes are the type of ears that we have, fingerprints, flattened fingernails, opposable thumb, two pectoral mammae. I mean, the type of teeth that we have, specifically the molar that we have that comes to 5 points interrupted by a Y-shaped crevice, all of that. We are, by definition, apes. And this was figured out almost 300 years ago by a Christian creationist who couldn't make sense of his discovery. And so he challenged the scientific community to find a difference, a taxonomic difference between humans and apes, because he said he couldn't tell them apart. And then what they did was they created an arbitrary construct of a classification called Pongo, which was all of the apes except humans, which, if you're going to say all of them except us, that's a Freudian admission that you realize we are one of them. But then in the last 30 years or so, the genome has come back to show that our genetics are nested within the other apes, the other great apes. That Pongo had to be reclassified, so now it's just a subgroup for orangutans alone. And
Okay,
Hominidae
can I
includes
get a
all
word
of the
in?
great apes.
Can I get a word in edgewise here, please, for a second?
Sure, you asked a question, I gave an answer.
Okay. Do you agree that the first transitional creature from the great apes toward humans was Australopithecus?
No.
Okay.
You have to, first of all, we were talking about the transitional from the great apes. So the only way I can make sense of that, since we are great apes ourselves, is that you must be talking about going down to the stem. And if you're going down to the stem of, at the stem of apes would be proconsul. I mean, that's the earliest fossil we have for that. And then there's Dryopithecines. There's about 40 species of those, and those are pre-chimpanzee, pre-gorilla, and so on. So if you want to get into early, like the split between the lineage that would lead to humans and chimpanzees and the other lineage that would go to gorillas, the closest thing we have there is Sahelanthropus, I think it is. But if you're talking about to distinguish human from other apes, the first of that, where there's a transition between the Australopithecines and humans, which is Kenyanthropus plateops, which is virtually indistinguishable from either one. And the best way to identify a the best way to identify a transitional species is by whether creationists are arguing which side of which imaginary line they say it's 100% on the other side of. If they say that it's on both, if one guy says, oh, it's 100% ape and another one says it's 100% human, well, now we're talking about a transitional species, because creationists have had that same kind of argument for virtually every type of transition. Archeopteryx is 100% bird, it's 100% dinosaur. Acanthostega is 100% fish and 100% tetrapod. They can't agree on what it is. So when they can't decide and they argue with each other over which side of that line it is, that's a transition.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Archeopteryx, because I noticed that you talked about it in one of your videos, and I made a list of a couple of things. I would like to keep this as civil as possible. And so when I say that you've said something in error, I'm not calling you a liar. I believe it's an honest mistake. But when you said that Archeopteryx was like the poster child of transitional fossils, that's just simply not true. Proto-Avis was first in the fossil record by 20 million.
The reason that Archeopteryx is the poster child is because it was predicted by Charles Darwin in his book in 1859, and exactly what he described and predicted was discovered within 2 years, vindicating his theory while he was still alive. Now, Archeopteryx was the first transitional recognized as such, but there have been many hundreds found just within vertebrates since then.
How can it transition if a predecessor was a pure bird?
Because there was no predecessor that was a pure bird, and Archeopteryx
Proto-Avis was 20 million years older than Archeopteryx.
Proto-Avis is not a pure bird.
Okay.
And we're not talking about a ladder either. We're talking about a branching tree. Now, Archeopteryx was originally described back in the 19th century. Archeopteryx was described as a true bird. And then it was decided that no, it's missing too many features to be a true bird. And then there was argument as to whether it's even part of the bird lineage. So it could be a sidestep. Now, as I was saying, since Archeopteryx was discovered, there have been multiple dozens of other transitions found just within the dinosaur to bird lineage. So Paravian dinosaurs, we now have dozens of transitions, but Archeopteryx remains notable only because it was the first one ever recognized as such.
How do we identify a transitional species?
A transitional species, I have that definition in my book, but I didn't have the definition ready. A transitional species is one that looks like it has characteristics of lineage A and characteristics of lineage B, and some characteristics partway between the two. And ideally,
how do we identify them?
I'm sorry, what?
How do we identify one?
Through taxonomy.
Or comparative anatomy, DNA analysis in the fossil record is the answer.
Through taxonomy. If you have the genetics, so we use that. If you're dealing with fossils only, then we use morphology instead. But in either case, you use the taxonomy to identify it. And that, in fact, was the very first evidence there ever was for evolution. Now, the interesting thing was that Carolus Linnaeus, when he put up his taxonomic tree in 1735, he realized that all of these things were inconsistent with creation. These are not created kinds, because everything had a long lineage of a family tree ahead of it, of distant ancestors ahead of it in branching trees, in a sequence of different clades. Now, he put down 7 categories or classifications or ranks, which we now know that just in the human lineage we have 7D, so it's 10 times that just for the named clades that we have. So it's quite a bit more extensive than he could have imagined. But his problem was that he knew that how you could get variation within a species, microevolution, but he didn't know that you could make new species. There was no mechanism for that. He thought that new species could only come about as an act of special creation by God. And then Darwin came along and wrote on the origin of species by means of natural selection. So now we have a mechanism that actually can produce new species, and that argument should have been over with then. Now, the argument with creationists back then were saying that no new species will ever evolve. We'll never witness the evolution of a new species. But now, with yourself as an archaic example of the past, most creationists have abandoned that because they realize that speciation has been directly observed and documented so many times that it's become impossible to deny it anymore. So now they push the goalposts back to say that macroevolution must be some higher taxonomic level, like at the genus level or the family level. And Ken Ham said it could even be at the level of a new order, if necessary, in the case of elephants.
That's because the word species has been bastardized to have almost no meaning whatsoever.
Except that it hasn't at all. Right now, we're talking about the biological species concept.
There's one species of dog, one species of cat. But if you get to cichlids, there's 2,000 to 3,000 species. That's
cichlids?
Cichlids. CICHLID.
Okay, cichlids. You're talking about the fish.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so you don't have one species of dog, and you don't have one species of cat. You got many different species of dogs and many different species of cats. to start with. And we're going with there is no bastardized
I'm talking
translation
about
unless you're reading in creationist materials, because they bastardize everything. But in science, we go with the biological species concept, which is for sexually reproductive animals. It's when two species or two individuals are closely related enough that they can and will continue to interbreed, that they're chemically interfertile, and they will interbreed without being in captivity, and they can produce viable offspring, or not just viable, but fertile offspring that will continue to interbreed. The same thing as the biblical concept of men, kinds, right? Can they bring forth after their kind? Now, when this variety continues and you have isolated groups, if you take one population, separate the groups into two different areas, say interrupted by a boundary like a desert or something like that, or a big river, then after not too many generations, you'll notice that distinctions appear on either side. So that if you have a lone wanderer in the middle ground between them, you'll be able to tell which group it came from, because it'll have those distinctive traits. Those
That's
traits.
just adaptation and variation.
Right, exactly. That's what evolution is all about. Now this continues.
No, evolution at macroevolution at that level is basically shape shifting.
No, it isn't. Not remotely. There is no significant difference between macroevolution and microevolution. It's the same exact mechanism continuing consistently throughout.
That's not true.
It is absolutely true. Yes. I'm sorry that you don't know anything about evolution, despite the fact that you said that you've been debating evolutionists for so long. How can you have been debating evolutionists for so long and still not know what the hell you're talking about? So I do know what evolution is. I can show you in academic teaching materials what evolution is. I recommended earlier, and you didn't take my advice, but I told you to go look up Evolution 101 from UC Berkeley. They give you a full definition of what evolution is. You can look it up right now while you're talking to me and see that, yes, I am right. You can look it up from any university you like and see that, yes, I am right. And you are wrong. There is not a university anywhere out there that will support what you're saying. So you have this variety constantly building up through unique mutations in each group. When you have genetic isolation, that diversity continues to build until the point where you get the diminished results. If you were to get a crossbreed, if two interlopers from either group were to find each other somehow, there would be less and less chance that they would produce fertile offspring. And then as their diversity continues, there's less and less chance that they would produce viable offspring. And then once they don't produce any offspring, then once they don't interbreed anymore successfully, they have become two different species. That's one of 4 observed types of speciation that have been recognized so far. That's allopathic speciation.
Okay. You sarcastically suggested that I read Evolution 101 from Berkeley, and I've been on that website many times. I've also read Jerry Coyne's book, Why Evolution is True, and Richard Dawkins' book, The Greatest Show on Earth, and all these other books on evolution. And the reason that I don't believe it has nothing to do with the Bible. It has everything to do with logic and reason.
Okay, so you read the site where it says biological evolution, simply put, is descent with inherent modification. This definition encompasses everything from small scale evolution, that's microevolution, from the changes in the frequency of genetic gene variations in a population from one generation to the next, to large scale evolution, that's macroevolution, for example, descent of different species from a shared ancestor of many generations. So you read that definition, showing that I'm right about it, and yet you still are arguing against Berkeley. You're going to argue against the academic definition.
Listen, Galileo, everybody in the world told him he was wrong. And he was ultimately proved right.
Okay.
I'm not saying I'm talking about words. I'm saying that if you take a logical approach and you say there's creation on one side and there's evolution on the other, immediately you realize it's an imbalanced equation.
You're right, because it's not creation on one side. It's literally fact versus fantasy. We have the fact of evolution that we can demonstrate and observe and measure, and then we have blind, baseless speculation about a magic invisible man.
Life cannot evolve until it exists.
That's correct. And so that's why abiogenesis is an entirely different set of completely different chemical processes in different chemical environments as well. Now, I can show you all the studies that we know so far, literally dozens of peer-reviewed studies on the development of life. But those are completely unrelated to how evolution works. Those processes by which life emerged are not the same processes by which life evolves. So we're talking about evolution, so we need to stay focused on that topic.
No, what
Oh, you want to change topics?
We're talking about evolution because you're trying to win an argument.
I'm trying to correct a
about
lie. You
creation
said that the things that we know to
evolution,
be true about
because
evolution are
I'm
mere
trying.
beliefs. That was incorrect. I'm going to correct that error of yours. And while we're at it, I'm going to correct your definition because it is wrong. I've just demonstrated that. The word macroevolution was invented by a evolutionary biologist. Evolutionary biologists own it and they control what it means. What it has always meant is what I said that it meant. It is not what you say it meant. Speciation has not been bastardized. We adhere to the biological species concept in this case because we're talking about sexually reproductive animals. You were wrong about that too. You're welcome to correct both of those errors, and we can talk about whatever you like.
Well, this is going about as well as I expected. You're trying to constantly push the conversation so that it's only focused on evolution.
I said once you correct your errors there, which are definitely errors, and you must correct them, then we can talk about whatever you
Let's
like.
talk about your errors for a minute.
Let's see. What error have I made?
Okay, first of all, in one of your videos, I want to say it was I don't remember.
And I want everyone to notice you had the opportunity to admit the error when it was proven. And instead of doing that, you then changed it to try to project, to imagine that I made an error. And then we're going to have to argue. We're going to have to show you again that I didn't make an error. And you still won't have admitted to the one we've already proven for you.
Okay. You said in one of your videos, it was about a troll that you were correcting. You said the universe has always existed. The Big Bang is evidence, but the Big Bang is evidence that the universe had an origin.
I didn't say that the Big Bang is evidence that the universe
I
had no
said
origin.
the Big Bang is evidence that the universe had an origin. You said the universe has always existed. That simply isn't true.
Okay, so I've talked to a number of cosmologists about this, most recently Sean Carroll, who says that, of course, the first law of thermodynamics, that matter and energy are eternal. Universal wave function is eternal. The
Where do
Big
these
Bang.
laws come from?
Laws don't come from anywhere, they're properties. In order for a thing to exist, it has to have properties. And whatever we recognize as natural laws are the properties of reality that we have so far ascertained.
How can the universe have properties before it exists?
There's no point before it existed. And so it doesn't have properties before it exists.
Every book
It
I've
doesn't
read
have
on the
properties. It can't exist unless it has properties. So the cosmologists, right, these are the ones who know about the beginning of the universe or the start of the universe or the topic that you're talking about. They say that there was no beginning of the universe. That even in models, even in cosmological models in which there is a singularity, the singularity is eternal. There was never a time before there was a singularity. There may have been a time before the Big Bang in some models. There's never a time before the singularity. In models that have a singularity.
Time and space and matter didn't exist.
And that means if time itself didn't exist, then as we track backward through time to get to the point of the Big Bang, that means that we have time stretching out as an asymptote, becoming longer and longer until 1 second equals infinity when t equals 0. So the singularity still existed eternally. There was no there was no beginning of the universe.
Prior to the singularity, there was no space, there were no galaxies, there was not even an atom.
And so according to
the universe,
according to some cosmologists and some models therein, because they're still arguing about which these models are, and I can't speak authoritatively about that. When I talk to physicists, they say that they know very well what these things are. I don't know very well, so I'm not even in a position to argue with them. It's irrelevant to me how or if the universe had a beginning, but it doesn't matter. The cosmologists are telling me that there was no beginning anyway.
It does matter because you can't exist without this universe to support you.
So what? Whether the universe had a beginning or not, your God isn't real either way. Either way, evolution is still a verifiable thing that we can prove is really happening. And either way, even if a God exists, evolution is still real and the Bible is still bullshit. Either way, doesn't matter. Now, you said you had evidence for a designer, and I'd be happy to hear where you shift to arguments instead of evidence and then make the admission that you never had evidence to begin with. But I still want to get over where you were correcting me when I was already correct. And I want to cover those things.
Okay.
Now you say that you found an error that I made, except that the cosmologists are backing me up. So I didn't make the error, did I?
Okay, let's just keep going down the list. You said that no atheist believes that the universe was created from nothing. Lawrence Krauss,
whom I know, does not himself believe. If you read past the title, you realize that he's being tongue-in-cheek because he was creating a title that would grab people. He had to redefine what nothing is. It's not an absolute philosophical nothing there. Even he doesn't believe that the universe came from nothing. Now, bring up the next error that you happen to be wrong about.
Okay. You said that Darwin didn't believe in racial superiority.
That's right. He argued against it.
The original title of his book was On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life.
And in the
What
19th
is a
century,
favored race if all races are equal?
Because he was talking about races of cabbages and races of mussels. And in the 19th century, the word race referred to something along the lines of a subspecies.
On the
They didn't use the word subspecies. Yes, on the origin of species, he didn't talk about people. He was talking about cabbages and mussels and other sorts of organisms, all kinds of different things, but not people. Race meant subspecies. Now, he starts talking about people when he gets into the origin of man. And then he says that there is only one human race. He called out all of the anthropologists of his day to criticize them for their racism, because he made fun of them for two accomplished experts who classify the same individual differently when that individual's ethnicity is known, and yet they both classified him incorrectly. And he called out every leading authority of his time for how many races they all said that people had. Like Linnaeus said that there were 4 species of humans, and Louis Agassiz said there were 6 species of humans, and other people said there was up to 63 species of humans. And Darwin was the very first person who said, no, fuck all that. There's only one. There's only one species of humanity left alive in the world.
Why? If there's 3,000 species of cichlids, or however you pronounce it.
Why? Why is there only one race?
If Kenny Baker, the guy that was R2-D2 in the Star Wars movies, and Andre the Giant were buried side by side in a million years past, and archaeologists dug them up, would they be classified as 2 different species?
Hard to say. We'd have to, I don't know what criteria they'd be looking at. First of all, I think they'd be looking at populations of each. And there are some times with dinosaurs that one thing had been classified as a...
We know from DNA analysis now that both are clearly human beings.
Yes, we do. And we know that there's more diversity in dogs than there is between dogs and bears. That's just within domestic dogs. And then we have the genome that also confirms that bears and seals are both just outside of the family of dogs. Now, when you look at a bear or a seal, that wouldn't be very surprising. They do look a lot like dogs. But, when you're a creationist, you can't accept that bears and dogs are related. You can't accept that seals and bears and dogs are related, because you gotta make believe something else. But now we have the proof that, yeah, they are. And not only do we have the genetic proof, we also have the fossil evidence
All
for
right,
it as
that's
well.
another little bone of contention. You're using words that you yourself said are not appropriate.
What
You
words are not
said
appropriate?
you said proof. Proof belongs in the realm of mathematics. In
Except in
science,
the context that I use it, which I've specified many times, that proof in the context that I'm using it is an overwhelming preponderance of evidence beyond reasonable doubt. And by that definition, we do have proof that dogs and seals, or that bears and dogs and seals are all related. Not just genetics, but also with fossils.
bisexual reproduction, descent with modification.
Yes. And then by the diversification leading to speciation that I described before. If you were to look, for example, and I bring up this example all the time because creationists don't seem to be aware of it for whatever reason. Sure, we have a Great Dane and a Chihuahua are chemically interfertile, and all these other dogs can interbreed, but you can't interbreed with an African painted dog, or with an Asian raccoon dog, or with a South American bush dog. Those are distinctly different species. They're still dogs. There's no argument about that. And then foxes are also within the same classification. So a dog is any member of the taxonomic family Canidae, and that includes foxes. And there's many different species of foxes as well, but they can't all interbreed with each other, and they certainly can't interbreed with other dogs. And then we have other sorts of dogs in the fossil record that are even more distinct, like the Borophagenes and the Hesperocyanids. And these are very, very distinct and much different than the dogs we have today, but they're still dogs. And they're definitely different species of dogs. So evolution not only is philosophically possible, it's absolutely certain. It happens. It's directly observed. It's measurable, verifiable, and repeatable, testable. Yes.
All right. Before we move on from the things that you said that I believe are errors,
What did I ever say that was an error?
I've already.
I mean, I have made errors, just not any of the ones.
I've given you 4 examples already. You
gave me 4 things that I was right about and you were wrong about.
Okay. You said that Hitler was a creationist who didn't believe in Darwin and rejected evolution as sin.
Yep.
Hitler believed in and practiced eugenics, which was.
And Darwin did not. Darwin objected to eugenics.
Eugenics was Erasmus Darwin and Francis Galton, who was.
And who?
Charles Erasmus Darwin
and
Francis Galton.
Okay, I thought you said Francis Collins, because earlier you said that Francis Collins created COVID-19.
That was in a Facebook conversation.
Yeah,
and I didn't say
that's why I thought you were bringing up Francis Collins again.
I said that he suppressed information about COVID-19 on social.
Well, I'm not even going to argue that.
All right,
Darwin explicitly argued against eugenics, which was a practice being used by religion long before Darwin. This was in practice in the 1st century already. I've seen documents are advocating for religious reasons eugenics.
But
so religious organizations.
Charles, we're talking about Hitler,
right? And Hitler objected to not just to Darwin specifically, but he declared himself to be a creationist. He used the same arguments that all the creationists do. In Mein Kampf, you can find it yourself, where he argues that evolution is only possible within limits, only within a kind, by which he means a species. And he says that the evolution of new kinds that belief in the evolution of new kinds is a sin against the eternal creator.
Okay. Well, Hitler said a lot of things that were politically convenient as he was trying to convince people to commit genocide.
Yeah, but you know what he never said? Ever? He never said that he accepted Darwinian evolution. Never once.
Hitler said in 1937, when we know today that the evolution of millions of years compressed in a few decades repeats itself in every individual, then this art we realize is not modern. It is, on the contrary, the highest degree archaic and far older probably than the Stone Age.
Okay.
That's not something that creationists would say.
Yeah, well, he says when we would know that.
Biology curriculum endorsed by the Nazi Ministry of Education.
Except that Nazis are entirely creationist organizations, as is the KKK.
Okay.
And they declare themselves such. They state in their own document, in their own
I
materials.
don't even know how we can continue this conversation if you're just going to state.
You could try be right about something sometime eventually.
You're just making stuff up.
Excuse me. I don't like to be accused of being a liar. I have credibility.
I told you I wasn't trying to accuse you of lying. I said that I wanted to give you the benefit of the doubt. You just told me
that I was making things up. I can show documentation. I gave you the citations for where it is. I told you where Darwin said this on The Origin of Man. I told you where he argued against eugenics. That was in his first book on The Voyage of the Beagle. When he was, they were criticizing Darwin after Origin of Species came out. They criticized Darwin for being behind the eugenics in Australia. What was actually happening was that was already underway decades before he'd even come up with his theory. It was already happening when he got to Australia, and he talked about what a horrible abomination it was. So it wasn't his fault. He was against it, and it was happening long before his theory. These are just some of the many lies that creationists always tell. So creationists lie constantly as a matter of course because you have to defend the faith. Okay, but I am not. So if I tell you where it says something, that's what it says, and that's where it is. What?
Okay. I said, so now you're calling me a liar.
You said I was making shit up. I did not. I can show you in my
said that I believe you were making honest mistakes.
If you make stuff up and call it true, that is lying. That's what creationists do. That's what all religions are. But that's not what I do.
Well, when you were talking about Hitler, you were saying things that were not necessarily true.
What did I say?
You said that the Nazis were a creationist organization, yes, and they uniformly taught biological evolution.
No, I did not ever say that the Nazis uniformly taught biological evolution. In fact, I said the opposite.
I know that
Hitler was a creationist. Okay. Hitler argued against evolution. Nazis typically, even now, are still creationists and always were. And the KKK broadly proclaimed themselves to be biblical creationists. They do not accept evolution, with the caveat that some of them
are trying to create a master race.
Some of them will say that other races have evolved, but not white people. White people were specially created. Now, tell me that I'm making that up. And then when I show you the documentation in their own mouths, from their own pages, then what are you going to do? You're going to apologize, say, oh, well, I shouldn't have stuck my foot in my mouth again? Why don't you learn not to accuse people of lying until you can show that they actually said something wrong?
Okay. Historian Richard Weikart, who wrote several books about Hitler, including From Darwin to Hitler, Hitler's Ethic, The Nazi Pursuit of Evolutionary Progress, and Hitler's Religion, The Twisted Ideas That Drove the Third Reich. He wrote an article called Was Hitler Influenced by Darwinism? And in that, he said the quote about evolution that I read to you earlier. And then he also said that the official biology curriculum endorsed by the Nazi Ministry of Education, as well as books approved for schools, uniformly taught biological evolution, including human evolution.
While it is commonly said that the Nazis burned Darwin's books and were supported by the Catholic Church, as Hitler identified as Catholic. And Catholics at that time were against evolution still. And as I said, the KKK is
here's the problem I have with people like you, Aaron.
You hate being wrong all the time?
What?
The problem you have with people like me. Go ahead.
The problem I have with people like you is that you say things that, you know, you're accusing me of lying. You're saying
you accused me of lying. You accused me of making stuff up.
Okay.
And I did tell you that you were wrong about your definitions, and we're still waiting for your admission of error there, which I don't think we're going to get, because faith means never admitting when you're wrong.
Because I don't think I'm wrong.
We can prove it.
No, you can't.
You can prove it. You can look it up.
You can't prove anything.
Yeah, the definition of the word. You gave the wrong definition. I said what the definition really is. Go ahead, look it up. You said you've been there before. Let's look it up. Which of us is right? What does it say?
If you think I'm going to go running
See,
off,
you're not going to admit error. It doesn't matter how clearly it's demonstrated. You're never going to admit it. Now, you mentioned that you had evidence of a designer. Let's talk about another definition. What is evidence?
Oh, I had that. Hang on a second.
And by the way, I pulled up a list from my book of different universities that teach evolutionary biology, and they all give definitions, and they're paraphrased, but they all mean exactly the same thing. Berkeley's online primer says macroevolution refers to evolution of groups larger than individual species. University of South Carolina Beaufort says macroevolutionists study the processes that cause the origination and extinction of species. Shall I go on? Because I've got another 7 or 8 of these to show that I'm right and that you got the definition wrong. And you can go ahead and believe that you're right, but I have proof that you're not.
Evidence is information that goes to establish a point. I'm trying to wing a definition. Let me just look.
You're trying to make one up. Why don't you look it up?
The available body of facts or information that include whether a belief or proposition is true or valid.
Very good. Now, the simplest definition is simply a fact that indicates. It's much more succinct, but it means exactly the same thing as what you just read. So the first thing that it has to be is a fact. Now, a fact is going to be a point of data that is either not in dispute or is indisputable in that it is objectively verifiable. If you claim some fact in favor of your position, we first have to both be able to establish that that thing is a fact. Like when I gave the definition for macroevolution and you said, no, it's something else, we can go to look them up and see which one of us is right. Okay, it's a fact that it's defined the way I said. Now, you have a fact. There's a point of data. We can both show that it's true. And then it also has to be indicative, which means that it has to be positively indicative of or exclusively concordant with only one available position or hypothesis over any other. So, do you have a fact, any point of data that we can both verify to be true that is exclusively indicative of the God hypothesis?
I have 10 different pieces of information that I have identified as evidence of a plan. When I say a plan, I mean that the universe was planned from the Big Bang to cosmic inflation to abiogenesis to the creation of you and me. The evidence of a plan, the first one that I've got is Fibonacci spirals and Mandelbrot.
So what was the plan?
Those are repeated patterns that are found in nature.
What is the plan?
I don't know the plan.
Well, then how do you have evidence of a plan if you don't know that there's a plan?
I'm giving you evidence of plans because repeated patterns do not exist unless there's intelligence to process.
Incorrect assumption. Repeated patterns constantly exist in replicating systems. It's a property of emergence, which I realize goes against everything creationists believe in because you have everything turned upside down. You think everything is orchestrated by an administrator from the top down, when in fact it's emergent from the bottom up. But these are repeating patterns that occur naturally without intelligence necessary.
Okay. A fine-tuned universe.
A fine-tuned universe. This is a weak argument because we are only able to exist on a fraction of the surface of this one tiny rock that is not even 10,000 miles in diameter.
I don't understand fine-tuning, my friend. Fine-tuning means that the universe would not exist if any of
It
six
wouldn't exist as
biological
it is if
had
it was different.
even the
And if it was
slightest
different, it would be different. I grant you. But that does not
You're just
imply
gonna
it.
keep talking over me every time I talk?
Okay, make the whole ass argument. Okay, we all know it. It's weak. It's failed. You don't. You're the only one who doesn't know why it is. Say the whole thing, and then I'll correct it.
Okay. Fine-tune universe. The Big Bang was created the universe from nothing.
Except that it didn't.
Okay. Sir Martin Rees did the research, the 6 cosmological factors, and Roger Penrose calculated that for this universe to exist, the odds were 1 in 10 to the 300th power. That is a very, very
The odds.
small.
So we're going with the
It's a
probability. The
probability.
argument from improbability fallacy.
It's a probability. The heart of my book, The God Conclusion, is a probability argument.
Okay, so your entire book is based on the argument from improbability fallacy, where you can take any number of things that happened today, and if you figure in enough variables, you can make everything that happened today statistically impossible. But if you completely eliminate how replicative patterns do have a system of emergence to them, then everything comes down to a roll of the dice. And that's the way I realize that that's the way creationists think things happen. They don't realize that some things have a guided that there's a I wanted to say deterministic, but I understand the philosophers will say that that's the wrong word. It's not just a random thing. There's guidance. It's self-directed in a sense. It doesn't have a goal, but it has a means of correcting itself.
You know, it's funny that you say that, because Roger Penrose, who is an atheist, he has come up with the cyclic conformal. I can't remember the name of it right off the top of my head, okay. But he's come up with a theory as an alternative to the Big Bang and cosmic inflation, because he's unhappy with the idea of the universe having an origin. But he admits that the universe seems to have a purpose, and it can't have a purpose if it's not planned.
Let's talk about that then. So the fine-tuning argument, the purpose for the fine-tuning argument is this strange imagination that the universe was finely tuned just for life, despite the fact that all life
finely tuned just to exist. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
well, it would be different if it was different. It wouldn't be exactly as it is.
It wouldn't exist.
Still exist, but it would exist differently.
No, it wouldn't exist.
Sorry, it would still exist differently if the parameters were a little bit different. That's the thing. That's the fact. Sorry. But
you need to read more about the Big
Maybe
Bang.
You need to read some. Maybe that's not maybe the problem isn't that I need to read more. Maybe you need to read something sensible that isn't entirely religious apologetics, because all of that is bullshit. Now try also to think logically, since you dared to use the word logic at the beginning of this conversation to describe something and defend something that is entirely irrational, based on every logical fallacy there ever was. Now think about this. If
my
the
life
universe
has been based in logic,
that's not evident in this argument.
For 2 decades.
Your argument hasn't had any logic to it at all. You said that what we have observed hasn't happened because you don't believe it. Argument from incredulity fallacy. So sorry, your arguments are not logical. They are illogical. You don't know what logic is, I'm sorry to say. Now, if we get back to the topic, if you want to pretend that the universe was created for us, then, or for any life, then why is it that we can only exist on a fraction of the skin of this one tiny rock, and we will die instantly anywhere else, everywhere else? How big is this universe? It would be different if God could have made one continuous plane where we could just continue wandering forever, but that's not what happened, right? So we got this one little bitty world, and we can only exist on part of it, and much of it will kill us under the right conditions.
So now we get to the point where God can only exist if he exists according to your parameters.
Except that's not at all what I said. You just completely misunderstood that. There's lots of ways that God could have done this, or that the universe could have existed that would imply what you're talking about. But instead, what we have is something that is a fact in evidence against God. We have the fine-tuning of the universe being an argument against God because life can only exist as we know it right here, and thus far we haven't seen it anywhere else. Everything will die instantly everywhere else we've been or seen. And the universe is fantastically huge for all of it to be completely lethal to life. Now, if God invented the universe for life, we'd be able to live everywhere. And we would live everywhere. There would be every planet. There wouldn't even have to be planets. It'd be just an endless plane. But even if there were multiple planets, we'd be able to hop to them like we could to other islands. That would be a universe that was planned for life. The universe we have is to kill you everywhere. This universe doesn't care about us. And we only exist here. So evidence against God. What's your next failed argument?
Sorry, I'd scrolled down. I kind of got lost as you were rambling on there.
Yeah.
Um,
It's disturbing that you're just going to discount whatever I say, even when I have the proof of it, and you never admit your own errors.
you're not
That's the
even
problem.
listening to my argument, my friend.
I've listened to your argument 1,000 times. It just hasn't been your face putting out that argument. I've been doing this for a long time. I've heard this over and over and over and over. I wish you guys would figure out the problem with your argument and still quit repeating the same dumb argument. That doesn't work. How many more times do I have to hear Pascal's wager or the Kalam cosmological argument? Once you know what the proof against it is, once you know where the argument fails, the next 5,000 times you hear it from the next 5,000 people is still going to be just as stupid. I'm sorry. I've been there, done that. So what you have, instead of evidence, you have arguments. You have arguments with the conclusion that a thing exists, and whether you understand it or not, you're going to assume a God. So whatever, fact A, this cup, doesn't matter. Therefore, God. That's your position.
Thank you for insulting me.
That's it. Creationists don't have evidence. They don't have logic. There's not a rational or logical argument, and there's no evidence to support the position. Nothing, nowhere, never was.
I was hoping at one point to get into a thought experiment with you.
Okay.
About how a new species might come to exist.
Okay.
And I was going to use ape to human evolution, and I was going to start
Except
with.
we're still apes.
Okay.
It'd be like,
when
bird to duck
I corresponded with Ken Miller, I watched several of his videos when he was talking about how he had proven evolution and this, that, and the other. And it was just an incontrovertible fact. And one of the pieces of evidence that he offered was that human chromosome number 2 was allegedly formed by the fusion of 2 ape chromosomes.
Well, not allegedly. I mean, pretty solid evidence there.
Okay. And my question to him was, you use the word fusion, and fusion in mechanics and physics and normal applications means something that's an instantaneous process. And I know from what little bit I do know about biology that if you take a chromosome, you can't just misplace it. You have to preserve all of the information in that chromosome as it's moved in the genome or whatever in the DNA so that it's spliced together. And the word that he used is fusion. And like I said, that's an instantaneous process. So to me, that was almost implying that
I got to tell everybody that John told me that if his dog hears my dog barking, that his dog would go, "Shut up!" So hard to be a podcaster with a great Pyrenees. I apologize.
I've got one too. They're barking at each other.
Is yours a Pyrenees?
Yes.
Oh my word! All right, continue your thought experiment, please. I'll mute while you do.
Okay. So for the progression to begin from ape to human, one of the steps is that HC2, human chromosome number 2, had to be formed by a fusion event, or he called it a Robertsonian translocation. But still, it implied that it was instantaneous. And to me, the only way that it would make sense for this to happen would be for it to be instantaneous. Would you disagree with that?
Sorry, it took me a minute to find my mute button. Yeah, it would occur to me that that would be instantaneous. That I don't know if that qualifies as a mutation, the fusion of chromosomes. Because I mean, I'm not a geneticist. I have no
I'm not
knowledge.
either. We're just having a conversation.
Yeah, I mean,
But
I would think that it had to be one fusion that ended up being replicated in all subsequent variants. But you
okay,
know,
so
we know
we
that.
had a breeding population of apes, and
Okay.
they got separated, sympatric speciation, by a mountain range or whatever, and from the other breeding population, and this population one, let's call it, starts to develop this HC2 fusion mutation in the population.
Okay.
You with me so far?
Okay.
All right. Now, when it happens at first, I would say, let's say there's 500 breeding pair in this population that's separated, population one. And 10 of them, let's say, start to have this mutation. It's still relatively rare, and it may develop into a recessive gene, but it's not going to immediately be pervasive in the population. You agree with me?
So you're talking about fixation. The
I'm trying
mutation
to
happens.
understand the process of
Yeah.
how.
Well, I sometimes I lose some of the terms that I need when I need them. But you're talking about that a mutation occurs, and the mutation can be in an individual and can be passed down to the immediate descendants. But whether it's fixated in the population is another matter. And there's another word, an alternate to the opposite of fixation. I can't remember it right now, but I think that's what you're referring to. So
That's fine.
in this case, just like when we have Down syndrome is a chromosomal variance. It's one of the downsides of chromosomal variants, and we know that these people they're still part of the same species. They can still interbreed with everybody else. They're still functionally the same people. And so, what would happen with this instantaneous event that you're talking about, this chromosomal fusion, is we've no idea what the immediate effects were, if any, but that individual that had that initial mutation was still fully functioning with everybody else, at least as far as being being able to interbreed and produce viable offspring and all of that. And so, yeah,
Agree.
and there wouldn't be a first human, I think, is where I'm going with that. So you could go back if you could see your mother at 20 years old and your mother's mother at 20 years old and your mother's mother's mother at 20 years old, and just go on all the way back for thousands of generations. Eventually, if you've got them lined back to back to back, several miles down the road, you'll start to notice that, hey, they don't look quite like mom does now. But you would never be able to say which one. You'd never be able to point out which one was the first person. Much the same way that we know that in Roman times they spoke Latin, but in Italy now, in Rome now, they speak Italian, and there was never a first person to speak Italian. Italian replaced Latin, but it didn't do so instantaneously. That was over time. Same thing with Spanish and French. Both of those started out as Latin, and they became Spanish and French. And if you read documents that were written 1,000 years ago, you'll realize that this is not quite Spanish yet, but neither is it Roman Latin anymore. It's still a Latin language, but it's not Latin anymore. And much the same thing would be in speciation of people. So you look at how did French as a species, Spanish as a species, Italian as a species. So the Spanish and French became there. I think they're, oh, I forget the term. Oh, I hate when I forget terms when I need them, but they're different types of speciation. One where
There's
cladogenesis.
Allopatric and parapatric.
Cladogenesis is what I was going with for Spanish and French. Yeah, cladogenesis and I forget what it is for Italian. It's not anagenesis. But it's where Italian replaced Latin. So the Latin has to go away for Italian to exist, but Latin doesn't have to go away for Spanish or French to exist.
Okay. Well, getting back on point here for a minute, do you agree or disagree that at some point in the evolutionary process, that chromosome HC2 has to go from being a recessive gene or a recessive trait to a dominant trait?
I don't know how to answer that question. I really don't.
Okay. Well, it seems to me that that's kind of a fundamental sticking point when it comes to macroevolution.
Here's why it's not. The gene for 6 fingers, what we call pentadactyly in humans, is dominant. Practically nobody has 6 fingers, but that gene is dominant.
How can it be dominant if nobody has 6 fingers?
Strange but true, right? Yeah, I don't know how that happens either, and that's why I can't answer your question authoritatively. I don't do genetics, so I can't tell you. I mean, I've taken genetics, but I don't know how to speak on that.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I noticed on your videos that you call people at the top of the donor chain epistivist. Is that?
Epistivist is it's a word I wanted for a long time, and a friend of mine invented that word, and I just happened to have a symbol in need of a word to go with it, and so we put those together.
Well, congratulations! It's now officially on the internet.
Yeah. So
I was able to look it up and come up with a definition for it.
Yeah. So my friend Kate Farr came up with the epistivist, which is somebody who rejects faith.
Okay, but see that's the problem I have is you just admitted that there's a lot about genetics that you don't know. So there are things about your system of beliefs
which are not faith and are therefore trust instead. But trust is not faith. Trust needs a suffix and a prefix to become faith, because faith is a complete trust that is not based on evidence. My position is based on evidence. Faith, by definition, in the context of religion, is not.
Well, faith, according to the dictionary, is defined as complete trust or confidence in something or someone. And I don't know how that complete trust or confidence can't be called faith.
Well, because
when you don't know by observation or experience on your own.
I don't have a complete trust in anybody. I mean, I will accept that my dentist probably knows more about dentistry than I do, but that doesn't mean that my trust is complete. I will trust when the mechanic tells me something that he's probably right, but that doesn't necessarily absolutely mean that he's right.
Well, yeah, then I hope that you'll accept that my reservations about accepting macroevolution.
Except that I can prove what I'm saying. If you challenge me on any specific point, I will deliver.
You cannot prove
it.
I
will deliver.
Okay. You can show me things online.
Yeah, well, of course, because this is the information highway, right? What would you prefer? Do you need me to drag your ass into a lab, or do we need to go to a field expedition? What exactly does it take? I mean, we were just talking about the definition of a word. Easy enough to clarify, right? And you even denied that. And you said you had already been there. And then later, when you said that speciation never happened, and I mentioned allopatric speciation, you conveniently came up with sympatric speciation. So you know that speciation happens. You know
I
that there's
know
different
it's in the
categories.
book that it happened, but the cichlids of Lake Victoria, Coyne said that isolation is the key event in creating a
For
new
certain types,
species.
not
And
every type.
what?
Not every type. Matter of fact, you just mentioned sympatric speciation, which is one, if I remember correctly, because there's 4 of them. I may be confusing one of these. Allopatric is the easiest to explain because that's the one where isolation is key. But I think it's sympatric, where you can actually have a new population emerge within the old population, no separation at all.
Getting back to my point, Jerry Coyne wrote in his book, Why Evolution is True, that isolation is the key ingredient or the key factor in the creation or the emergence of a new species from an existing population. Within Lake Victoria, which was isolated for years and years, there were cichlids, and up to 600 new variety of cichlids were observed in this lake. But the marine biologist said that they were all new species of cichlids.
Okay.
And my point is that a cichlid is a cichlid and a trout is a trout.
Okay, so you don't accept that different species of trout are different species of trout?
What?
I got to tell you, the reason that I hate religion is the constant lying. And the reason I hate religious extremism is the dedication to constant lying. And creationism's favorite lie, which is a lie that they deliberately lie about, that they know is not true, but they still say it anyway because they're deliberate liars, is that evolution is supposed to be one kind changing into another fundamentally different kind. Evolution never taught that. Evolution doesn't allow that. That would violate 2 of the laws.
Let's do a logical.
That would violate 2 of the natural laws of evolution, the law of monophyly and the law of biodiversity. So a whatever is always going to belong to every ancestral clade that its parents did, or that every parent clade that its ancestors did.
Neil Schumann wrote a book called Your Inner Fish.
I know that. I've read that book and I interviewed him. Yes.
Yes, and his claim is that eventually, if you go far enough back in the evolutionary history, you can find that humans were fish.
Except that a fish is not a taxon. There is no consistent definition for fish. So we use the word chordate instead, which, by the way, you will note that we are still chordates. We never changed. Fish is a colloquial term, and the term that they use for this gilled thing that has fins and has scales and all of these other characteristics, that's not consistent for everything that is universally recognized as a fish. So in order to have a consistent definition that applies to all of them, you have to go to monophyly, which is the new system of taxonomy, which replaces Linnaean taxonomic ranks. Monophyletically, cladistically, we are still chordates, which, if you want to use the word fish, we are still weird monkey fish. So there was never a point at any stage. And remember,
here's the problem. You say we are weird monkey fish.
Yep.
And then you call me a liar for saying that there's supposed to be some form of evolution that I am calling macroevolution.
Incorrectly, knowing that it's incorrect.
The transition from one species into another species.
Okay, that's correct. I'll grant you that one.
Hey, yay!
Yeah, and so we have one species of trout produces a different species of trout.
There's only one species of trout, and then there are subspecies of trout.
Let me just see how quickly can we prove that wrong. Species of trout on Google. What do you want to bets? Anyone? Is there only going to be one species of trout? Because I've never looked this up. I don't know. Oh, 14 types of trout species. Types of trout species. So there's There's genera of different trout. There's not just different species of trout. There's different genus of trout as well. Look at that. You were wrong again. Don't you ever get tired of always being wrong about everything all the time? Wouldn't you like to be right about something once in a while? That
Sure.
would bother me if I said something in public that somebody proved to be wrong and it's happened. It would bother me. I would be humiliated. I would still
You
rather.
went and looked up words on the internet.
Yeah.
They don't prove that there are 14 different species of
How much
trout.
proof do you need? What proof would you accept? What would it take for you to, because you've attached your identity to believing in a fantasy that is not true, you've made your identity into believing this fictitious thing and denying all of reality. How much reality could I then feed you to get you to understand that that fantasy is false? What would it take? Ken Ham said nothing. Ken Ham says no amount of proof will ever change his mind because he doesn't care what the truth is. And I don't think you do either.
When I was a software developer for many years, I went to college. I learned about Darwinism to some
What is
degree.
Darwinism?
Just let me speak, please.
I mean, it's got to be another loaded word, is it? But we have to pretend that science is a religion just like our religion. No, science is not a religion. Evolution is not a religion. There's no such thing as Darwinism. Darwinism is a 19th century term for Darwinian mechanisms, and it was in contrast with Lamarckism. But Lamarckism is dead, despite epigenetics. Lamarckism is still dead. We don't have to distinguish Darwinism from Lamarckism. It's not Darwinian evolution anymore. It's just evolution. That's it. There's no such thing as Darwinism, and it's not a fucking religion. I don't have a belief. You said earlier that everything I know about evolution is just a belief. That was a lie. I can prove that what I have is not a belief, like yours is a belief. Mine is knowledge. Yours is not knowledge. Yours is a belief. There's a huge difference. I know what I know, you don't. That's the difference. Fact, fantasy. That's where we're at.
Okay. If the Big Bang was the origin of the universe,
and it's not,
except for all the physicists and cosmologists,
and all the physicists who say it's not.
Okay. And then abiogenesis.
Shall I call up Lawrence Krauss and Sean Carroll and get them on here with you?
The origin of life. And it was a single-celled organism, probably an autotroph.
Multiple of them.
Okay. I can't say anything that's right.
No, it wasn't a single cell. It wasn't one thing. It was populations of them. And then there were lots of changes subsequent to that before they would become anything that we would recognize as life. It's an incredibly complicated process.
Okay. Francis Crick, who came up with DNA, calculated.
That was charitable.
I'm sorry. It's getting late. I'm tired.
I get you.
Got up at 5 this morning. It's 8:15 my time. So
where are you?
Georgia.
Okay.
So trying to complete a thought. Abiogenesis was the origin of life, and then for 2.3 or something like that billion years, those single-celled organisms didn't change.
You mean changed constantly in every direction?
But they didn't evolve into anything other than single-celled organisms. They reproduced.
That's not a classification either. Okay. You can have single-celled plants, and you can have multi-celled plants. The only thing that's multicellular by definition is animals. So all of those single cells are constantly evolving into other things. And some algae became multicellular, plants became multicellular, all independently, all at different times.
Okay, I'm gonna have to shrink the window for a second because I
need to get another drink. I'll be right back.
All right.
Appreciate the conversation, by the way. I'm always trying to reach out to people, and it's frustrating because what I'm dealing with is apologetics organizations that deliberately mislead their readers continuously, misrepresenting everything. And that's why everything you say has to be corrected.
Whatever.
I was being charitable. You've been lied to all your life by professional liars, and I'm trying to help you.
Dude, you just don't know me at all.
I don't have to know you to know the people who have lied to you and know what lies they told. I do know that they are lies, and I am helping you.
No, you're not helping.
Yeah, I am.
No,
if learning the truth is better than being lied to, then better than being deceived, then I am helping you.
All right. Well, getting back to abiogenesis for a moment.
Okay. What would you like to know?
It's not what I'd like to know. It's what I'd like to convey.
Okay.
The odds of 10 base pairs of DNA.
The odds, again, we don't have properties. We don't have processes that are
Can
producing.
I ever finish a sentence?
It's just a dice roll. Because it's never just a dice roll. These are processes. They're going to be predictive. They're going to head in a certain direction. So it's not a dice roll ever. So whenever you say, well, the probability of, then your argument is already wrong. Anything that starts with that is already wrong.
All right. The universe
that means your whole
planned or unplanned. If it was planned, then these laws and these rules that you're talking about, then they have application. But if it was unplanned, then there's no reason that anything is the way that it is.
I'm trying to figure out why you would make either of the assertions you just did, because neither of them make sense. If there was a God, shit wouldn't happen the way it does. Evolution wouldn't be the way it is, not unless God is a dick or completely apathetic. If God doesn't care about anything, or if God is a committee of different people who don't care about anything, then maybe. But the God of Abrahamic religion, no, everything would be completely different than it is. If God was worthy of worship, if God was an utter asshole, then maybe it could be the way it is.
When you make a statement like that, I just don't really know how to respond.
Why would a God create a world, create a universe in which life is going to be dead everywhere? We're in a shooting gallery of boiling chaos, just waiting for the next random thing to come along and wipe us all out, as has happened a number of times in Earth's history. And then give us where we have to have sleep, for example, and in our sleep we have dreams, and some people will think that dreams are God talking to them, and then go off and kill other people or cut off the ends of their penises or whatever because they think the dream told them to. All of this kind of ridiculous madness. Why would God allow all these different denominations of all these different religions to kill each other over which version of a fantasy character they prefer? If there was a God, there would be real communication of actual truth that would be able to verify, and you wouldn't need faith. The only thing that needs faith is a liar. That's the only person who wants your faith.
And see, you're in denial that you have any faith.
I'm not in denial of anything. I absolutely reject faith as the most dishonest position it is possible to have, because it means asserting baseless speculation that is not based on reason and defending that against all reason. It is the most dishonest position you can have. You couldn't make it more dishonest.
The second definition from the dictionary, which applies only to religion, and faith in general is just belief or confidence in something that you cannot verify of your own.
I wrote a rather lengthy article on this in which I include dozens and dozens of citations from different apologetics ministries and different theologians and so forth to attest that faith is exactly what I just said, that it is a belief that is not based on evidence. It's assumed without reason and defended against all reason. I'll be happy to give you the link to that. And that's why I reject it, because faith depends on lies and defensive lies.
My
Truth does not need or want faith. And if you had truth, you would not need or want faith. You only need faith when you don't have truth and you want to believe it anyway.
I'll hand you this. You are very, very eloquent, and you talk right over me.
That was never my intent, by the way.
Well, I have had a very difficult time getting a word in edgewise.
I apologize sincerely.
I accept. I would like to at least complete one thought that I started out with in this process, and that was going from an estimated minimum number of base pairs needed to form the first cell is 530,000. Sir Fred Hoyle calculated what?
Fred Hoyle was a disaster. He had no
He was
concept of
one
what
of
he
the
was
most
talking about.
brilliant scientists of the
He was a
last.
fuckhead. He didn't know anything about evolution. He was the stupidest person to ever be able to qualify as an astrophysicist. I mean, it's amazing how dumb he was. He's the one that came up with the tornado in the junkyard thing. Again, going back to rolling of the dice, because he doesn't know how processes work. He doesn't know that processes are going to generate
I'm sorry, but you can insult me all you want.
I'm
But when you
insulting
start
Fred
insulting,
Hoyle now because he was an idiot. He was also a creationist. He actually argued for creation.
I'm sorry to be crude, but you couldn't carry Fred Hoyle's jockstrap.
Do all you will. I've read Fred Hoyle. He was a moron. He didn't. He was so dumb.
He
I have
proved the anthropic principle. Good
again.
Lord.
How many more times? How many more times do I have to read the idiocy of Fred Hoyle to satisfy you? Do you know how much I've written about what that moron said? About the idiotic, self-contradicting arguments that he made? It was probably the worst person you could have mentioned. He was such an idiot. He actually argued for continuous creation in his desperate attempt to try to keep the universe eternal for whatever reason.
Fred Hoyle was an atheist for most of his life. He coined the term Big Bang to mock the idea that the universe had an origin.
Except that he argued for an intelligent designer and a creation. He argued for continuous creation.
That's not true.
It is true, and I can show you the quotations for it. I don't say things that are not true. I'm not a creationist. If I say that Fred Hoyle said something, he said that thing. He argued for continuous creation of new hydrogen atoms.
That Hitler
He's
was
the one that came up with that idiotic tornado in a
true.
junkyard thing. He argued for an intelligent designer using, by the way, the exact same argument you did, because he knew fuck all about evolution. He kept thinking it was a probability thing, that you had to roll dice a bunch of times. He was a moron. He was so dumb that the idea that
I'm sorry, but I'm sorry, and I'm not trying to insult you, but I just think it's hilarious that a guy with a Bachelor of Science degree is calling a PhD a moron.
I've debated lots of PhDs who are morons. Would you like to be introduced? I've met several. Now, I have great respect for academics. I do. But I've met 2 or 3 people with doctorates that are utter idiots. I know. I can think. Here's one for you. Perineon Senapathy. He was a geneticist working for the Human Genome Project. And he believed, he was against evolution. He believed in abiogenesis, unrelated abiogenesis, billions of unrelated abiogenesis events. This guy was so dumb that he thought that blue crabs and fiddler crabs and every other species of crab did not evolve from a common ancestor that was a crab. He thought that they all spontaneously generated out of the ocean, out of abiogenesis events. Billions and billions of abiogenesis events. That man had a PhD and was working on the Human Genome Project, and he wrote something that stupid. You can have a PhD and be a complete idiot.
I just don't even know how to finish this conversation. Progress in Biophysics and Molecular Biology, which is a peer-reviewed magazine journal, wrote that the transformation of an ensemble of appropriately chosen biological monomers, amino acids and nucleotides, into a primitive living cell capable of further evolution appears to require overcoming an information hurdle of super astronomical proportions, an event that could not have happened within the time frame of the Earth. And that's probably why Francis Crick came up with directed panspermia, which is
you understand?
literally sperm from space, even though you say that space is so inhospitable that life can't exist anywhere but Earth.
Except that panspermia does not mean life came from space. And Francis Crick's quote is not what you're implying here. I once got a chance to talk to Richard Leakey, and I had to contact him because I was talking to these creationists, and they were quote mining a bunch of different scientists. They'll take like one sentence out of this book or out of this paragraph or whatever, where if you take that one sentence, it sounds like they're saying the very opposite of what the whole paragraph says.
Oh,
And I was
kind of
able to
like
show.
Universe from Nothing, Lawrence Krauss.
Right. Shall we bring in Lawrence Krauss to the conversation so that he can correct you on this? Because I've talked to the man about this. Okay. So, as I was saying, I hear all of these quotes from all these scientists, and then when you get to the actual where the quote is from and you read the whole page around it, you realize, oh, that's not what he said at all. The only way it looks like that is if you clip this one little sentence out, which means that they knew, whoever clipped that sentence knew what the whole paragraph said, and that it actually said the opposite of that, or that he was actually talking about something different than that. It's called quote mining. So there was one where I was arguing with this Young Earth Creationist website, and I got to show where 13 of their 14 quotes were completely dishonest misrepresentations, but there was one from Richard Leakey that I couldn't find any reference for. It was something he supposedly said on a TV show in South Africa years ago. No copies of it or anything. So I wrote to the man, and he wrote back to me saying that he was talking. First, he mentioned the astonishing stupidity of creationists, and said that misquotation is the hallmark of their work in their deliberate dishonesty. So that's what they're doing. So what you're reading there, I don't have the ability to check where the original source is right now, but later on, I can put it in when I find it. I can put it in the comments to find out what he really said, what the whole paragraph said, and find out that it says exactly the opposite. So, as we've been at this,
Okay, well, what?
We've been at this an hour and a half. I'm keen to go on, but I don't want to continue to ramble. So I want to get focused. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, speaking of quotes,
you going to give me another quote mine?
I don't know how to have a conversation with you, to be honest.
How about give me something that's actual, factual, real stuff? Don't just quote some scientist out of context that when we see the whole paragraph, we realize that they're saying something opposite of what you're misrepresenting here. Because I've been all over that. Give me something. You said you had evidence of God. Give me a fact that we can both show to be true that is actually indicative of your position and isn't just an argument. It has actual evidence. Give me a fact that implies a God, and not what you did do, which would give me a fact that actually shows that there is no God.
When I look at my list, I see what I believe to be clear, almost incontrovertible evidence of intelligent design, an intelligent designer.
Let's just look before we even hear about those. Then let me ask you a question. Why is it that the majority of scientists, even in the United States, which is like the most Christian country in the first world, right? Even the majority of scientists.
Irrelevant.
What?
Whatever you're about to say is irrelevant. The majority of anybody is irrelevant. It only matters for the purposes of this conversation.
You're saying that you have incontrovertible evidence for God, yet the experts in the very fields that you're referring to don't believe in a God. Why is that?
Because they're biased.
Biased.
Yes.
How can you be biased if you have evidence of a God? What bias could possibly matter?
Okay, well, the Wald quote I was about to read you, I will now read you anyway. There are only two possible explanations for how life arose: spontaneous generation arising to the evolution or the supernatural creative act of God. There is no other possibility. Spontaneous generation was scientifically disproved by Pasteur and others, but that can leave us with only one other possibility, which is that life came as a supernatural act of creation by God. But I can't accept that philosophy because I do not want to believe in God. Therefore, I choose to believe in what I know is scientifically impossible: spontaneous generation leading to evolution.
That was whoever wrote that was an idiot. I don't even know who they were.
George Wald. He was like the father of biology.
Okay, sorry. Spontaneous generation was never the origin of life. Spontaneous generation was a supernatural belief in vitalism. Do you know what vitalism is? It was George Stahl's idea.
I've heard your speech on this, and I want to understand the difference between matter coming from non-matter.
But that's that's not it. So George Stahl came up with this idea of vitalism because he too was an idiot. He realized that if he puts old grain in a jar without a lid on it, that he'll find mice in the jar
later. Are you
later.
the only smart person on the planet?
Sorry, we're talking about the 1600s now. So yeah, people were stupid. So
well, you know what? In like 2000 or 200 BC, they made the Antithecra device, which was an analog computer and had functions and calculations that modern people would have a very difficult time.
Okay. But you notice how I'm not even able to get to the point because you want to interrupt to complain that I'm interrupting you. Right? Spontaneous generation was a supernatural belief in vitalism. The idea that as you die, your soul dies with you, and that the supernatural life force that animates living things rots, and as it rots, it would produce maggots, molds, and mice. Right?
I've already heard this.
Well, then why are you arguing for something you know is wrong?
Because Wald said in his quote that spontaneous generation and abiogenesis are basically the same thing.
Exactly, completely different. They're not even related to each other. So there is no vitalism. We understand that life is a chemical process. There is no animating life force. There is no vaporous fluid that emanates from dead bodies, and that's the reason why they stink. And it doesn't spontaneously generate maggots, molds, and mice and other things. We know that spontaneous generation, which was disproved by methodological naturalism, which is another thing creationists hate, by a guy who supports abiogenesis, by the way. Louis Pasteur supports abiogenesis, or supported. But those are not the same thing. They're not even related to each other. So if you want to quote some guy who's talking out his ass about things he didn't know about, how is that relevant to our conversation?
Whatever you want to call the event of first life, the origin of life, since we can't agree that spontaneous generation and
spontaneous generation is specifically attached to a supernatural belief in vitalism. That we don't call it that only because spontaneous generation is a label we have given to a supernatural belief in an animating life force, and we know that no such thing exists.
You just love hearing yourself talk, don't you?
I'm sorry. Should I just every time you say something wrong, should I just let it go? Should I just let you say all the errors without any correction? Is that what you would prefer?
I would like to be able to make a point.
I bet you can't do it in less than 5 errors. Go ahead.
All right, let me look at my cheat sheets.
I'm going to read some comments because I've got a shit ton of them. And I'm going to try to run through them all at once, if you don't mind. Jesus as God says, I'm called according to Jesus's purpose, and it will take you guys to change Aaron's heart, because whatever he's been through, Jesus can heal his heart. Well, that guy's smoking a lot. NM says, I disagree with his position, but the aggression is unnecessary. Chillax, Aaron. Okay, fair point. John McDropout says false dichotomy. Don't know where if that was too long ago. Super Rico 4, black and white fallacy.
Planned versus unplanned universe.
What?
That's just a guess.
I'm sorry, what?
He was probably saying the false dichotomy about the planned versus unplanned universe.
I've no idea. It was too long ago. Feckenel says abiogenesis. RPG debunks says false dichotomy. These are things that my wife has selected from the chat. Single terms are not going to help me here. I'm going to have to skip the single terms. Why are scientists not studying your God? That was from DP. Carly Stir says, Glenn, it's frustrating to watch, but I can't look away. Digger Evans model railway says, ha 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 BS. I'm going to have to skip some of these. I don't know why my wife selected them. Stop coping and admit you were conned by a Torah deception. That was Douglas Grosh. And then Unclean Unicorn says, all a conspiracy. All biologists are in on it. Michael Blacktree, false dichotomy. I'm going to have to select some of these because a lot of them are just meaningless at this point. I'm skipping a bunch of them. McCreenan says abiogenesis arises from benzene ring polar lipids that self-assemble into membranes and tubes that make cells. Well, there's a hell of a lot more to it than, a whole fuck ton more to it than that. Urfa Man says that's the pot calling the kettle black. Most of this is nonsense. Most of the selected chat comments, I'm afraid, are stuff I just need to skip.
Oh, I wasn't.
Yeah. Warren Suthoff says, I'm sorry?
I wasn't paying any attention to them anyway.
Yeah, these are things my wife selected, and normally, what? I can't. I know. I'm on the private chat. Oh, I thought I apologize. I was reading from the regular chat. Thought I was in the private chat. I'm so stupid. Cooper Gates offers $10. Next time someone says, look at the trees, I guess they think trees are designed for humans to kill them and print Bibles using the paper. Hive Sai says he does know that there are species where the sexes have different number of chromosomes, right? And then Jipperson perhaps says, Aaron Ra, you should establish how old he believes the Earth is. Grady Matt says, why do theists value truth for other religions but not for their own? Kuru Mayu says, the raccoon dog, the African painted dog, domestic dogs cannot mate. Revelade new member says, macroevolution is just the same thing in a longer time range with significant difference. Too Young to Feel This Old offers $10 and says, I have to say that this is fantastic. Great job, Aaron. I only wished the man getting ripped apart wasn't wearing a UGA shirt. Go Dogs, but science comes before football. I would have no idea about that. I don't watch football. PhD Tony gives $10 Australian, says, the problem your guest has is common amongst science denialists. Having undergone no formal assessment, they have no way to confirm that their understanding of anything they have read is correct. Welder Smurf for $10 says, I can't keep listening to this guy, so here's a little for Aaron. I remember when that one came up. J.I. Person says, what did this God do in the 9.2 billion years between the Big Bang and the formation of Earth and the 4 billion years that life on Earth remained single-celled? Good question. PhD Tony for $10 Australian says, we have no probability distribution function for universes. As far as we know, the probability of the universes taking its present form is 100% because all universes we observe have these properties. And Who the LOL PLN offers $16.66. It says, John, I would love to talk to you. Can it be arranged? I contacted him through Facebook. Who the LOL, if you want to share an email, contact or whatever, I'm sure that can be arranged. And then the final one to this point, Scapegoat Iscariot. Faith is what Hebrews chapter 11 says it is and has nothing to do with reality. Now, faith is the confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. I get that. You're supposed to believe what you believe because you were told to believe it. All right. I apologize for completely misreading that. Anyway, go ahead, please.
I forgot what I was talking about. You
were looking up something while I was reading those.
Well, I started reading them too. I saw one thing about, no, I can't find it again. Oh, gosh, I'm tired. Something about, okay, there's a lot of insults and stuff, and there was one that was kind of interesting, but I'll just skip it and go back to what I was talking about, which I'll try to remember. My argument, when I first became a Christian, I was what I would call an apathetic agnostic. I didn't know if God existed, and I didn't really care. I was an information IT guy, programmer, and so I was just a capitalist. And I don't need to get into my whole conversion story or anything like that, but after I had my conversion experience, I didn't care about science or anything for the longest time until Richard Dawkins was on the Colbert Report advertising his book, The God Conclusion, and he said, God Delusion, and he said that cars and computers and cell phones are all intelligently designed, but the human being is not. And as a IT guy, I thought that was a pretty stupid thing to say, because computers are modeled after human consciousness. I mean, they're trying, it's an attempt. Neural networking and all of that the goal of programming AI and everything is to model the human mind.
Trying to arbitrate, be the administrator from the top down is never going to duplicate what emerges from the bottom up. We can't get that level.
I've tried to explain to you that the laws of probability, roll your eyes all you want.
It's probability again. You don't realize that there's processes involved that are going to get there, so that it's not just a dice roll. I get that you're never going to correct yourself on it.
That is a pure assumption. And
no, it is not. It's pure data, not assumption. Its conclusion reached tentatively because of the facts and evidence, not assumption. Your belief, assumption. My position, not.
It was answering the troll guy. That was the name of it. And, you know, in that video, you rattled off a very impressive list of experiments regarding abiogenesis. But from what I was seeing, it was like, I'm looking for the Great Wall of China, and you're saying, okay, here's a brick.
Here's a brick, and here's a brick, and here's a brick, and 10 million bricks later.
And there's no entropy ever?
Entropy? Okay, are you really going to try to use the second law of thermodynamics as an anti-evolution argument? Did we not already cover this ground about having heard the dumbest arguments creationists have ever come up with? And why
everything that's coming out of my mouth, according to you, is dumb.
It's the same shit I've heard over and over and over. You realize I've argued with creationists every single day for the last 25 years. Do you not think that all of this is just going to be the same shit for the 10 zillionth time by now?
The difference is I've been reading books that are written by scientists,
as has every other
creation that you're telling me is wrong.
Dumbass arguments without ever realizing why they're wrong.
Lawrence Krauss.
Okay, why let's try to get you to understand this. I think the best way to do that is the Socratic method. Why do you imagine that entropy should have fuck all to do with anything in this conversation with evolution? Go ahead.
All right. For the simplest animal, the simplest animal, I'm definitely getting tired here. For the simplest organism possible, there's a minimum of 250 proteins that are required. This is speculation, but it's still an estimated guess by the experts that a minimum of 250 proteins are required to provide minimal life function. And you don't like mention of any probability, but the odds of all proteins for a simple cell forming by chance are
It's
one.
not by chance, because your argument is fundamentally flawed. It's not
If
by
it's not by chance, it's
It's
planned.
chemical
If
processes.
it's not by chance,
chemistry.
it's planned.
Okay, when you put two hydrogens and an oxygen together, what is the probability that they'll make water?
100%.
But it's not a dice roll. It's because there's chemical
What is
things
the
going on.
probability that those three
It's not
molecules
probabilities.
exist?
These are chemical processes. They're not a random dice roll. It's not by chance. It's not random. You believers can't understand what the hell chance means and why you keep using it when it is inapplicable. Entropy, in this case, is wholly inapplicable. And you haven't even attempted to explain your justification for using that term right now. Go back to where
Because I
entropy
can't get
is
a
relevant.
word in edgewise. You interrupt me.
You
every
don't
time.
know what you're talking about. Explain what entropy has to do with anything in the development of life.
You ask me to explain. I start to speak. You interrupt me. You tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. This is an
You started
hour
talking
and
about the argument
51
from
minutes.
improbability
It's been a
fallacy
total
again.
waste of my
You had
time.
nothing to do with why entropy would have anything to do with the development of life.
Okay. You start out with inorganic, pre-organic materials. You get a couple of molecules forming. You have to have a lot more than a couple of molecules to have a cell. And all that time, the things that are trying to form, nature is trying to break apart.
Nothing's trying to form and nothing's trying to break them apart.
The time it takes for DNA to break down is like 2 weeks.
Okay.
That's entropy.
Okay.
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 We can just keep saying okay.
How is entropy relevant to the development of life? Why hasn't it? Yeah. How long does the DNA last? Did you just say?
I said that DNA, I read somewhere that it was like 2 weeks that
Oh, okay. How old are you?
outside of a cell.
How old are you?
I'm 63.
Why aren't you dead?
Because cells constantly reproduce.
Oh, so entropy isn't relevant in the origin of life at all.
It is in the formation of the first cell.
It's not the one and only first cell. There's a whole bucket of cells, and it still wouldn't be relevant even then.
You're so full of manure, your eyes ought to be brown.
My eyes are brown, but it's not because I'm full of shit like you are. You don't even understand. Do you not even understand what entropy is? It's not even a relevant argument in this case. Entropy is often brought up by creationists as an argument against evolution.
It's decay. It's
right.
decay.
Because again, they don't understand processes like homeostasis that will maintain a living organism
until it dies.
Inside a system like that is getting its source from the sun, and it's not a closed system, so the entropy argument doesn't even apply. That's the failure of your argument right now. So you haven't got any evidence, you haven't got any logic, you don't know how entropy works. You accept that different types of speciation occur, but you deny that they occur, and you say that the things that I can prove to be true are merely beliefs, but your beliefs should be true for some reason.
My beliefs are logical.
except that they're not. They're anti-logic. Every argument you have used has been illogical or been a logical contradiction. You keep arguing for entropy, for example. You keep arguing for probability, not realizing that these are processes by which probability and chance are completely thrown out. It's not a chance situation anymore because we're talking about replicative systems and chemical processes. It's no longer
So the
probability. It's
entire
not a dice
universe
roll.
is determined.
I'm sorry, what?
The entire universe is determined. It's deterministic.
I used to say that because I don't understand anything about philosophy. It's been argued that if it was deterministic, then there's no other way that it could possibly turn out. I'm wanting to find a term that describes something that's going to be cumulative, that it's going to be building eventually. If it's going off in every direction at once, then eventually some things are going to become more complex, or some things are going to become more derived. So and there's going to be natural selection, which is going to be guiding certain outcomes. So in that sense, that's what I was talking about, deterministic. It doesn't mean, when I was saying it, I wasn't saying that there's no other possible outcome. Certainly with extinction and everything, there are other possible outcomes. That's not what I meant by that. But it's also not chance, and it's not probability. It's not simply a dice roll. It's not a random thing. It's not what Fred the idiot Hoyle was arguing about, the tornado at a junkyard. Somebody in the chat said that Fred Hoyle was not an idiot. Yeah, I realized he was an astrophysicist. He was really good at math, but all of his arguments were fucking stupid. So, sorry. So bad that I have a problem accepting stellar nucleosynthetic theory just because of the source.
You know, it's unfortunate because I do have respect for your intellect. I don't have a whole lot of respect for your opinions or your attitude in this conversation.
I don't actually respect my attitude right now either. I'll be completely honest. I could be doing better right now, but I'm just irritated hearing the same shit all the time, and I'm at a loss for why people like you are like you. It bothers me.
I have taken the Bible completely out of the argument. I have looked at the scientific evidence with logic.
Except that you haven't at all. You've avoided the science altogether. You've replaced abiogenesis with spontaneous generation. You've replaced all chemical processes with chance and probability. You've argued against the scientists when you argue against Sean Carroll and Lawrence Krauss in arguing that the universe came from nothing and that the universe definitely had a beginning, when the cosmologists and physicists say that it did not. And you want to argue that the physicists are on your side, and I want to say that they argue that the physicists are on my side. Doesn't matter, but they are on my side more so than they are on yours. So you haven't been using logic at any point ever in this conversation. You say that what we have observed to have happened has never happened. Why? Because you don't like to believe it. Nothing about your argument has been logical at all, ever. You've already seen proof that your definition of macroevolution was incorrect. You've already seen the evidence that different species of dogs has definitely occurred. Even if you don't accept that bears and seals are related, you have to accept that different species of dogs have been derived from one common group, right? Even if you want to call it a kind, it would still admit that speciation happened. And if we ever bring up, things like Noah's Ark and everything, then you're going to have to talk about a super sped up, hyper caffeinated electromega evolution to try to calculate, how you can have all the current variety of species from Noah's Ark. So doesn't matter how we look at it, you don't have any logic in your position. I just wish I could have been more patient with you. I'm just fed the fuck up. I don't know how to help you. I don't know how to help people in your situation when all you know are lies.
Well, if I only know lies, they're lies I've learned by reading books that were written by people that you love and admire.
I don't love and admire anyone that I can think of off the top of my head. Well, Carl Sagan, I did. Yeah, I'll say that.
And your wife, I'm sure.
My wife hasn't written any books yet.
Well, but you still love and admire her.
We're talking about people who wrote books. So, comments.
I'm not going to stick around for reading more comments if you don't mind. It's been 2 hours. We were only supposed to go for an hour.
Yeah, and I do appreciate the conversation. And for everything it's worth, Okay, so she says some of the comments are questions for you. Starting from where, dear? Where did I leave off, dear? Cyberhex, $5. John, thanks for talking with Aaron. You are brave. I hope you will go back and do your own research. Peace and knowledge to you. I'm trusting that that's the one you were talking about.
Not a question.
Of course, it was about that. Yeah, and I do sincerely wish that I had more patience with you. You just have days when you just don't, and I apologize for that. I was really intending to conduct myself a lot differently than I did. Aaron Redden, fifth. Okay, let me find the link that she's telling me to look at. I apologize. She's telling me to look for something I can't find. I can find one for $5. I don't. Oh, here we go. Aaron Bredden. The walled quote mine is even worse. It's a complete rewrite of a quote. I looked it up. Okay. Well, yeah, that's the one you brought up earlier, apparently, but we don't have any details on why that is. Aaron Bredden, if you're still on, if you're still listening, please include that somewhere where I can access what the original context of that quote was. Cyberhex for $5 says, John, thanks for talking with Aaron. That was just the one I just read. And then Unclean Unicorn for $5 says, can Aaron explain to his guest how highly improbable events can be broken down into smaller steps to achieve high complexity? Not at this time. We've already been at this 2 hours, and I feel like that would be a good long while. It would be at least 20 minutes by itself. The Sinister Porpoise, $5. CS Major, other than some robotic applications and neural networks, are the only computing model that we use any part of the human body as a model. Okay, so that's referring to what you were saying before. And PhD Tony offers $5 Australian. John, reading is fine, but outside of the discipline, have you any training that you don't have? Let me read that again. But outside the discipline, you have training in. You don't have the capacity to correctly interpret the stuff you read. That's fair. Josiah Jean Boer, existence is just like a blink of an eye in the grand scheme of things. The entirety of the universe can be entropy, but that does not mean our local environment is. Yeah, and entropy is not relevant in evolution or abiogenesis ever at all. And then John F. McDropout. God rolled a dice to decide how many fingers on each hand, each human hand. We're lucky we got 5 and not 1. Josiah John B. The sun is an entropy, but that will last billions of years, and our existence is just a microfraction of that, and we get our energy from the sun, a star. And then, good question for $10 says, when Lawrence Krauss said something from nothing, he clarified that the word nothing corresponds to what creationists imagine things come from because they don't take quantum fields into account. And by the way, what he was arguing
also said that when you have nothing, you'll always get something.
And he's also arguing for something completely different than what Sean Carroll was arguing for. Totally different models. And then Shadow Freddy Fazbear says, and this is the last one. No, I know it's not. It's one more too. There's 2 after that. Can you tell Aaron Ra to say to John that probability is the chance it could happen, while possibility is something that will or will not happen? John is confusing the two. Written by Spinell. Sorry, I don't really understand all that. Then Larry Fishman, $20. I do appreciate that. Says there's no difference between living and non-living matter. Entropy is the drive toward.
I'm sorry. There's no difference between living and non-living matter,
Except that one of them is alive, I guess. Entropy is the drive toward an even distribution of matter and energy through the universe. Life, especially sapient life, increases the evenness simply by doing things. RPG Debunks says, no, it's not. No, what's not? The laws of physics are deterministic. That was the word I started to use. That made sense to me, but philosophers came in and told me no. I'm going to finish it, of course. However, the universe applies those laws in a probabilistic manner. Okay. All right, so we've read through the chat, and I do sincerely appreciate, and I want to be very
You
clear on
said
this.
that.
I did.
You said you appreciated me showing up.
Oh yeah, I did, and your patience in all of this, and I have been. I fully admit I have been a complete dick. I could have been a lot
Yeah,
better
you
off.
kind of have.
Yeah, I kind of have. And it's not something I intended to do, and it's something that I will be trying to focus on again if I ever have another conversation like this. So,
Fair enough.
all right, thank you for. I'll go ahead and let you go with that, and let you say whatever you want to end the show.
No, I don't want to make any parting comments or anything like that. It was hard enough to get a word in edgewise. I will repeat, I do appreciate the opportunity to try to communicate with you. It wasn't very easy. And best of luck.